Hello, everybody. This is Jong Bang at the Department of Political Science in Gyeongsang National University. It is my pleasure to give my lecture about the Korean political economy in English. I have taught many foreign students in my university. They are from United States, and Japan, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Azerbaijan, and even the Mongolia. But I found out the Korean languages are difficult for the foreign student. So it is my pleasure to give you, the foreign student, an English summary of my lectures. The Korean model of development. This lecture was delivered in the 2013 in the January at the Cairo University in Egypt. Then let's think about what is development. What is development? We want to develop ourselves. But how can we do that? And what is the goal of development? I'd like to introduce the classic definition of development: increasing quality of life as a homo politicus. Increasing quality of life is everybody's hope. And for this concept, there are two sub-concepts. The first one is an increase of income, and the second one is increase of liberty. Income is economic goal, and liberty is a political goal. Then how can we measure the development? We have to find out the indicators. For income, we usually use the per capita GDP. I think you already know it. And for liberty, the political quality of life, we usually adapt the index of democracy. These two indicators are very famous in this field of political economy. Let's compare Egypt and Korea in per capita GDP. It is a very interesting thing. Look at this graph. Until the 1970s, the per capita GDP of Egypt is slightly higher than that of South Korea. But from the 1970s, the per capita GDP of South Korea increased rapidly because there are some fluctuation. But the GDP of Egypt is increased slowly. So in 2,000 years that the gap is so big, as shown in this graph. And let's go to the political indicator, the ranking of democracy. The ranking of democracy shows a very interesting indicators. These indicators were given by the economist intelligence units. Korean democracy, the rank of Korean democracy is 22nd. And it is classified as the full democracy. But look at Egypt, is 115th. So it is classified as a hybrid regime. And under hybrid regime, there are authoritarian regime. Actually, this means that these countries are dictatorships. There are two wrong views about the Korean model. The The first wrong view is the Korean success is because of the triumph military dictatorship. It is because of military dictatorship. Military dictatorship made the Korea such a success. But I'd like to say the Korean success is not because of military dictatorship, but instead of military dictatorship. Military dictatorship has paid many costs. Because the cost of dictatorship made the South Korea in danger. I'd like to show you it later. And the second wrong view is the Korean success is contributed to the free market. Usually, the economists of World Bank argued that the South Korea adapted the free market economy. So that is the reason why the South Korea has grown rapidly in relative to the other third world countries. But I want to say the Korean model is a classic neo-mercantilist state, and not the free market economy. Let's go to the 4 factors of the Korean success. The first one is land reform. Second one is education rush. Third one is the post-war international regime. And the fourth is the cohesive ruling coalition. If I'd like to the third world countries, I'd like to say the third world countries, if you follow these four factors, you can succeed as much as Korea did. Let's go to the first, land reform. Why land reform is so important for the rapid industrialization of South Korea. Land reform creates independent farmers. Let's see this table, the types of land ownership. In the year of 1945, the independent farmers only 14% of total peasant. The rate of tenancy was the 65%. It is common in the third world countries. But look at the 1970. Look at the 1975. The independent farmers grew up to the 72% of total peasant. This is an amazing one. The rate of tenancy is going down the 13%. So it means that in Korea, land reform was performed successfully. How and why land reform? How land reform could be successful in Korea, and why land reform is important in Korea's rapid industrialization. The Korean land reform might be possible by the non-existence of landlord class. Interestingly, historically, Japanese imperialism expropriated Korean land and crushed the old Korean landlord class. So in the end of the Japanese imperialism, there were very few Korean landlord class in Korea, in all Korea. And sudden liberation by American armies, American forces provided the vacuum of power on the land. In this situation is very favorable for the successful land reform in South Korea. The second factor is South Korea became a show window of Cold War. American military government controlled the South Korea since the 1945. Since 1945, American military government was looking for the power alliance, power allies in the South Korea. But interestingly, they didn't find out any landlord class at the time, and they tried to establish the modern industrialist. In order to do that, the land reform was inevitable. So that was a very important one. And the other factor is Korea was divided as North communist and South capitalist regimes. And North Korea completed land reform in 1946. Then what happened in South Korea? Over 80% of people are peasant, farmers. Then if South Korean government did not do the land reform in South Korea, then it might lose its legitimacy. So it is very important. So in order to compete with the North Korea, in South Korea conducted a successful land reform. How land reform was beneficial for the rapid industrialization in South Korea? The independent farmers have worked as provider of capital and labor. Domestic ratio of total investment during these critical years was 60%. It's amazing. Somebody says the South Korea imported the foreign capitals from outside. Of course, we have depended upon the foreign savings, but the major capitals comes from inside. Who can provide those capitals? How capital formation was successful in Korea? The only independent farmers could provide the capitals and labors for Korea's rapid industrialization. In addition, education rush provide well-qualified workers. South Korea adapted the developmental strategy of export substitution industrialization. For that strategy, Korea needs well-qualified workers, well-educated workers. This table shows how the independent farmers provide the so well-qualified, well-educated workers for the rapid industrialization. Look at the year of 1945, just after the liberation. There are only 19 universities in Korea, and only the 7,000 the student. But in 1980, it's rapidly increased. There are 96 universities, and the 413,000 the university students studied at the university. Of course, the primary school and the middle school, this rate of attendance is almost 100%. So this is very hard to find out in the third world. The outstanding performance of education rush in South Korea could explain why the South Korea developed so rapidly. Why Koreans rushed into education? Because education is treated as the opportunity of social upward mobility. It is the channel of social mobility. So Korean has a tradition of Confucian literati and higher civil service examination. It is a very important tradition. Even so, you are the son of farmers. If you enter the university and study hard and pass this higher civil service examination, you will be suddenly rich and famous. Everybody wants to be rich and famous. But the opportunity was very limited. But in Korea, it's equal opportunity was provided. If there was no independent farmers, and all the farmers they had to survive for their daily living, then how do they provide the money for their students' education? Only independent farmers could provide the monies for their sons' higher educations. So increasing capacity of individuals, independent farmers, is the real secret of Korean success. And the post-war international regime provide the capital, technology, and market. Especially the United States was very, very beneficial for the Korean development. Let's look at the graph, the table of American grants and aid. During this period, Korea received the $15 billion from United States. It's amazing. The Marshall Plan, the amount of Marshall Plan was $17 billion for all Europe. So we can see, we can understand how the United States has dealt with the South Korea strategically. And let's go to the cohesive ruling coalition. Cohesive ruling coalition chose the correct strategies. They usually based on communitarian spirit and export substitution industrialization, and they pick up the jables as national champions. Communitarian spirit is very important. If you look at the table of the neo-mercantilist plan of South Korea in 1972, Mr. Won-chul-oh told me that he provided this table to the President Park in 1972, and this original table. So this table shows how the ruling coalition was thinking about the Korean development. All these things is very important. If we look at the details in if you look at my book, you can find out the details of this table. In theory, he said the theory is role of mother theory. Role of mother theory. Have you heard of that? So the state, the government has worked as mother. So who are the sons? Business groups, companies, the chaebols, they are the sons. So in the primary school, middle school, high school, and sons, if sons are going to university, then they could be free from the influence of a mother. So the leader, look at the leader part. The state was leader in this time, and later civilian led here. This is the quite good example of the communitarian spirit. And then the role of the public enterprises were very impressive in South Korea. And the number of the public enterprises was like this. And in 1960s, it's 20. It's doubled here. And they created more. Even in 2000 years, in 2000 years, there are more the public enterprises were created. I think this is a very interesting table. Korean government did not make public enterprises in all the industrial area. The public enterprises were centered on the strategic area. Look at this one. Electricity and water, and transport and communication, and especially finance. The Korean government want to control the capital. The Korean Development Bank played important role in 1975. But this is still very important. Even in 2002, is 40%. And the chaebols are created as the national champions for the export substitution industrialization. Chaebols is a business group. As a business group, enjoyed economy of scale, economy of scope, and the creative entrepreneurs. Look at the table of Korean auto industry. And we can find out how the Korean firms enjoy the economies of scale. In 1962, there was only one auto firms here, and produced the 1,777 cars. But look at the 1985, there are 3 firms, and the economies of scale is 126,000. It's amazing. The economist of the auto industry says in the low limit of economies of scale in auto industry is 100,000 cars per firms, per companies. So Korean, the crossover the threshold in 1985. Look at this one. The 2007, only 4 Korean firms in the economy of scale is over 1 million cars. This table shows how successful how strong the Korean firms in the international market. Chaebols as national champions, enjoyed the economies of scope. The Hyundai Corporation, Hyundai Groups, the Hyundai Construction is a mother company, but now there are 11 groups, 11 business groups, and those groups including the 109 subsidiaries. It's amazing. But neo-mercantilist strategies create a polarization in Korean society. The neo-mercantilists abandoned the communitarian spirit and the imported neoliberalism. So why this happens? Because the growing power of chaebols over the state made it possible. The loss of we spirit. As a result, the pariah capitalism rises. And the polarization of income and power, and the monopolistic rent-seeking happens, and the corruption and the luxurious consumption happens in the ages. Usually in the period of the 1990s. The result is the financial crisis of 1997. It resulted in the end of neo-mercantilist state or neo-mercantilist ruling coalition. And the new democratic coalition formed at the time. And Kim Dae-jung became a president in 1998. But there is some problem in the democratic coalition. They failed to create their own new developmental strategy. They followed the old strategy. So unbalanced choice of democratic coalition happened. If they follow the communitarian spirit, then their policies can be a balanced growth of regions and the sunshine policies. Okay, this belongs to the communitarian spirit. But they still pick up the term of trading state as the nature of the Korean state. So as long as they pick up the trading state as a slogan, they have to subsidize chaebols. And the Nomuyon went further to make a Korean and U.S. free trade agreement. Even the Japanese didn't do that, but it's a very, very the dramatic initiative at the time. And this ruling coalition pick up the developmental strategies from the Samsung Research Institute. Some critics said the Nomuyon government is the Samsung Republic. It's very tragic one. Because of the failure of democratic coalition, the dictator's legacy revived. After the 2012 Korean election, the New York Times reported that daughter of a dictator wins the South Korea presidency like this. And Egyptian Al-Haram online says South Korea elected dictator's daughter, first woman president. Look this. This is a result of our failure. Is Korean democracy sustainable? Then I can say, yes, it's sustainable. How? If we establish new balance of power. a new balance of power will be set up among government, business groups, and civil organizations. This is the very important for our future. Let's go to the summary of the Korean model. Korean model, basically, communitarian spirits works in among the people, and growth with equality, especially land reform. It was very important. Land reform is very important in Korean model, and correct strategies. Korea did not have any valuable natural resources. They have only the people, human being. So they pick up the export substitution industrialization strategy. That was the correct strategy. Every country has picked up their own correct strategy according to their vision and natural endowment. Thank you for your attention. I hope the Korean model will be beneficial for human beings, and our Korean model will be sustainable in the future. Thank you again.